All right, this is lesson 5.1b for Math AH. Activity 1, fill in the missing information, then compare the rate tables. So I have to figure out what got multiplied to go from 48 to 60. Okay, so here I'm thinking 48 times something gets me 60. So if I solve for that something, I get 60 divided by 48, both multiples of 6. So 10/8, or reduce it, 5/4. So we know to get from here to here, we have to multiply by 5/4. So 7 times 5/4 is 35/4. Okay, here, when I see improper, I'm going to change, or when I see mixed, I'm going to change it to proper. This one's already giving it to me. This one's easier to work with. This is actually the same information. It's just because they gave me a unit, it was easier to work with. So these are parts of the same rate table, but working with the unit rate is much easier. Okay, so unit rates, they make your life easy. So what does a unit rate mean? Unit rate means it's something per 1. On the bottom is a 1 of something. Okay, so a unit rate is per unit. So I want the bottom to be 1. That's what we're going to be working on today. Recall that the ratio is a comparison of 2 or more values. A rate is a special ratio in which the terms are different units. A unit rate is a special rate expressed as a quantity per 1 unit. That is the important part. The table above on the right has a unit rate of 1 1/4 miles per hour. A bouquet of flowers has 6 roses and 2 sunflowers. So there's 6 roses and 2 sunflowers. So we know that there's 3 roses per sunflower. So we're taking a rate and we're dropping it down to a unit rate. If we were interested in knowing how many roses there are for every sunflower, that's called the unit rate of roses to sunflower. Thus, the unit rate is 3 roses per 1 sunflower. What if we wanted to know sunflowers per rose? Well, now I want the roses on the bottom. So 2 sunflowers to 6 roses is 1 sunflower to 3 roses, which is a third of a sunflower for every rose. To match this up per rose, you have to take a third of that sunflower. Now, in a unit rate, you might have fractions and decimals because the bottom has to be 1, so the top can really be any type of number. All right. So we had 2 different ratios we were talking about on the previous page. We know there was 3 roses for 1 sunflower, or a third of a sunflower for every 1 rose. There are always 2 possible unit rates because you can put a different unit on the bottom. One time it's sunflowers, the other time it's roses. That's activity 1. Okay, activity 2. John walks at a constant rate of 8 miles every 3 hours. What is his rate as miles and hours? So we want miles on top. So they gave you the rate. He said 8 miles for every 3 hours. That is a reduced rate. It is not a unit rate. It's just a reduced rate. Okay, we want to know how much per 1. And they wanted us to draw it out. That's fine. We can do that. So I am starting out with 8 miles. Okay, that's an 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. Now we're typically not going to draw these out. This is just to give you a visual for the first part. And then we're going to start out with our hours or miles. Nope. Let's cut that. Erase. Okay, we got 8 miles. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we did that in 3 hours. Third time is a charm. Use a bar model to find the unit rate of miles per hour. Now, I'm typically not going to draw a bar model to do this, but one time we'll give you a visual. We have 8 miles. Labeling it all up. 1 mile, keep going 8 times. And down below we have 3 hours. Okay, so there's not a pretty way to chunk 8 into thirds, right? To chunk 8 into thirds, they each get 2, and then I have to split up 2 into thirds. So they each get 8, 2, and 2/3. So if I cut this up into thirds, this chunk goes here. And then I have to cut this one, 1, 2, I have to cut this one in thirds. From here to here goes to this hour. And this one gets a third too. Okay, so we're seeing that I'm cutting it up. That is 2 2/3. Okay, also known as 8/3 miles per 1 hour. How far can he walk in 5 hours? Okay, so 5 hours. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. I know that each hour he walked 8/3 miles. That's what I figured out from number 2. So if I add that up, I have 40/3 miles. In 5 hours, John can walk 40/3. Or typically we're not going to say 40/3, we're going to say 13 1/3 miles. Okay. Now, I just did that with visually with bar models, not usually how I'm going to solve it. Usually, I have 8 divided by 3. Well, I know that 8 divided by 3 is 8/3, so that's the 8/3. Here, I know that I have 8/3 miles in 1 hour. Well, I want to get to 5 hours. So scale factor up, multiply by 5, multiply by 5, and then we get, 40 thirds. Okay, so typically it won't be with a visual. They were just trying to give you a visual to introduce it to you. Okay, fill in the following table based on John's average walking rate. Okay, so we have some information. We knew from the very beginning that in 3 hours he did 8 miles. We figured out that in 1 hour, that would be 8/3 of a mile. We figured out in 5 hours, that would be 40/3. Okay, so we know from our magic unit rate that if we multiply, if we go from the hours to the miles, we are multiplying by 8/3. Well, if there's no time, then you didn't do anything. That would be 0 miles. 2 times 8/3 is 16/3. Okay, 3 times 8/3 is 24/3, or 8. 4 times 8/3 is 32/3. 6 times 8/3 is 48/3, also known as 16. 10 times 8/3 is 80/3. 20 times 8/3 is 160/3. Every time I'm multiplying by 8/3, so whatever h is, I'd multiply it by, so I get 8/3 h. Okay, our unit rate was over here when we had 1 hour. 8/3 miles per 1 hour. How long would it take John to walk 1 mile? Okay. So I think about my unit rate. 8/3 miles in 1 hour is the same as what? 1 mile in how many hours? Okay, well, we have to think. 8/3 times 3/8 would get me 1. So this would be 3/8 hours. Okay, if I want to write it as a unit rate, I need the miles on the bottom. So we would say that's 3/8 of an hour per 1 mile. Always labeling. You always have to label because then you know what unit is on your bottom. Okay, so we had 2 unit rates, one time with miles on the bottom, one time with hours on the bottom. The number of miles is equal to 8/3 the number of hours, because you'd multiply by 8/3 to get from miles to hours, from hours to miles. And the number of hours is 3/8 the number of miles. What is the relationship between the miles per hour and the hours per mile? They are reciprocal, so if you know one, you can just flip it over. Write 2 different unit rates. They're 2 different unit rates because you can put the different units on the bottom. Okay, a sandwich shop uses 24 slices of meat for 6 sandwiches. So I just start out with my basic rate, whatever they gave me. Okay, we've got 24 slices, label it up for 6 sandwiches. Or I can write it the other way. 6 sandwiches for 24 slices. And I want to change it to how many slices in a sandwich. So 24 divided by 6, there are 4 slices in a sandwich. Or if I think about it the other way, if I only have 1 slice, I can only fill up 1/4 of a sandwich. Okay, once again, I start with the rate. It took 3/4 of a cake to feed 1/3 of the class. Okay, so my rate, 3/4 of a cake to feed 1/3 of a class, or I could have flipped that over. 1/3 of a class ate 3/4 of a cake. Okay, now I want to flip to the unit rate. I want to know one class. How many cakes are they going to eat? So to go from 1/3 to 1, I got to multiply by 3. So up here, I got to scale up. I got to multiply by 3. 3/4 times 3 is 9/4 of a cake. So I would have to buy 2 1/4 cakes. Okay. Over here, I'm trying to get to 1 cake is going to feed how much of the class? So here I know to go from 3/4 to 1, I have to multiply by 4/3. I get 4/9 of the class is fed by 1 cake. Okay, I realize that these are reciprocal. 9/4 of a cake per class. 4/9 of a class is fed by a cake. Okay, you should pause and try some. You should try 11, 12, 13, 14, and all the way through 16. And then you should come back and check your answers is what you should do. Okay, here I go. 1/2 of an hour rises 1/5 of a degree. Flip it over. 1/5 of a degree takes 1/2 hour. Now I'm trying to get to my unit rate. Over here, I want 1 degree. I have to think scaling up. 1/5 times 5 gets me 1, so I have to multiply by 5. It's going to take me 5 hours, or 2.5 hours, to raise a degree. Okay, the other ones are reciprocal. I don't have to think very hard. I know the reciprocal is 2/5. 1 hour, I'd have to multiply by 2. In 1 hour, it's going to rise 2/5 of a degree. The ant crawls 2/3 of a meter every 1/4 of a minute. So I set up my rates. 1 time with the meters on top, 1 time with the minutes on top. I choose which one's easier to work with. I like the first one. I want to get to 1 minute. I need to multiply by 4. So here I get 8/3 meters in 1 minute. I know the other one's going to be 3/8. It would be 3/8 because you'd have to multiply by 3/2. That's the scale factor, which would get you 3/8 minutes to go a meter. All right, Diego can swim 1/2 of a mile in 2/3 of an hour. What is the rate in miles per hour? So I've got to go miles on the top, hours on the bottom. I want to know per hour. I want to know in 1 hour, 2/3 times 3/2 gets me 1. So here we go, 3/4 of a mile per hour. Okay, hours per mile, I just have to flip it over. I don't have to do all the work. It's going to be 4/3 of an hour for 1 mile. Okay, I know they're reciprocals, so I can work a little faster now. If I have one, I can just flip it over to get the other. In 20 minutes, I ate 1.5 sub sandwiches. What is my rate in sandwiches per hour? I got to pay attention. They gave it to me in minutes, but they want it in hours. So first thing on my rate, time is on the bottom. So 1/2, I like to make that improper. 3 half sandwiches in 20 minutes. First, I got to convert to the right units. 20 minutes, 60 divided by 20, or 20 divided by 60, I should say, is 1/3 of an hour. Now I'm trying to get to a unit rate. I want to know 1 hour. 1/3 times 3 gets me an hour. So I'm timesing by 3 up top. That's going to give me 9 halves, or 4.5 sandwiches. 4.5 sandwiches per hour. Bob ate 3 3/4 sandwiches in 25 minutes. What is his rate in sandwiches per hour? Similar to number 14, so you should pause, try, and then check your answer. Okay, so I don't like it in improper and mixed, so I'm going to make it improper. So 3 3/4, that is 3 times 4, 12, plus 3, 15/4 sandwiches, 25 minutes. However, they want this per hour. That's 25 over 60 hours. I can reduce that. Those are both divisible by 5. That's 5/12 of an hour. Now I'm trying to get down to 1 hour. To think of the scale factor, 5/12 times 12/5. Okay, so I'm multiplying. 15/4 times 12/5. I like to reduce. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 4 goes into 12 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Bob is eating 9 sandwiches per hour. He is going to have a bellyache. At the 4th of July fun run, I ran 6.5 miles in 3/4 of an hour. How fast is that in miles per hour? Okay, so 6.5. I'm going to change that to improper. 6 times 2 plus 1, 13 halves of a mile in 3/4 of an hour. I'm trying to get to 1 hour. I have to think of the scale factor. 3/4 times 4/3 gets me 1. I'm timesing by 4/3. I think over here, 13 halves times 4/3. Okay, I've got some reducing. 2 goes into 4 twice. 26/3 miles. Okay, we don't usually think of it as that. We usually say 8 2/3 miles an hour, but either way is fine. I ran 8 2/3 miles per hour. All right, this is the mom problem. The child comes in and ruins the recipe. Okay, here we go. Travis was making muffins to take to his neighbor that had just moved down the street. The recipe he was working required 3/4 of a cup of sugar for 1/8 cup of butter. Travis accidentally put a whole cup of butter in the mix. Okay, so we're trying to figure out how to fix his now very nasty butter cookies. All right, so the original, we want the unit rate of sugar to butter, butter on the bottom. So 3/4 sugar to 1/8 butter. I want to get that to 1 stick of butter because 1 cup of butter, because that's what Travis dumped in. So I'd have to multiply by 8. He pumped in 8 times as much butter as he needed. He's trying to go for his heart attack. Okay. 4 goes into 8 twice. 2 times 3 is 6. So that's 6 cups of sugar now. How much does Travis need to put in the mix to have the same ratio as sugar to butter as the original recipe calls for? He needs to add 6 cups of sugar now. Okay, so he put in 8 times as much butter. So he has to put 8 times as much everything to make this recipe, that make his disaster actually taste good. The original recipe calls for 3/8 cups of blueberry. He now needs 8 times as much. How many cups of blueberry are needed to the new enlargement? So we have to multiply this by 8. So he's going to need 3 cups of blueberries because he put 8 times as much butter. So he has to put 8 times as much blueberries. He needs 3 cups of blueberries, and that's where the recipe just got expensive because blueberries are not cheap. If Travis wants to keep the ratios in the same as they are the original recipe, how will the amount of all the other ingredients for this mixture compare to the amounts of the single batch of muffins? He has to make 8 times as much. Okay, new problem. We're off with Travis. Francisco can read 7.5 books in 5 weeks. What is that rate in books per week? So per week on the bottom needs to be 1 week. So we're going from our 7.5 books in 5 weeks. I want to know how much that is in 1 week. So I have to multiply by 1/5, or I need to divide by 5, same thing. Okay, so I'm over here doing my fraction work. I don't need to run to my calculator. So 7.5, that's 15 halves, times 1/5. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 3 halves. 3 halves books per week, or 1.5 books a week. $1.5 books per week. How can you reuse the rate of books per week to calculate the number of books Francisco would read in 8 in a 7th week? All right, I'm going to take my unit rate. It's easy to work with. I really could take either one, but my unit rate is the easiest. So I know that I have 3.5 books in 1 week. We're trying to get to 8 in a 7th weeks. That is also known as 8 times 7, 56, plus 1, 57 sevenths. We need to multiply by 57 sevenths. 3 halves times 57 sevenths. I look for something to reduce, but unfortunately nothing reduces. So we get 171 14ths books. No one walks around town going 171 14th books. That's about 12 3/14 books. he needs to read a little bit more than 12 books a week. Said approximately, so a little bit more than 12. And that is the end of the lesson. So goodbye. I will see you next time.